Hi Bishwadeep.
Hi,
Welcome to Sudeep Audio's YouTube channel.
congratulations
Thank you.
thank you for having me on.
Please, it's a pleasure. For the viewers, if you could quickly run us through your engineering journey and your days from FTI, any interesting incidents that might have inspired you and people you met there, etc., and then how you came to Bombay.
Yes, I joined FTI in 1984. I passed out from FTI in 1987. I came to Bombay in 87, and since then I have been in Bombay, working mostly in all. I think I've covered most aspects of sound. So I specialized in sound recording and sound engineering, which was like really in those days. I wouldn't say simple, but a little rare. People never really chose that kind of a career. I don't know why I chose it, because of my love for music. I really have no explanation for that. I couldn't even answer that in the FTI interview.
Oh,
So, but anyway, and you landed at FTI, and I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And
you were a batch of how many students?
we were like, in our time, there was no acting course, but it was mostly a technical course. The main things were direction, editing, sound recording and sound engineering, and cinematography. So these were the four main departments that were there. Today they have
Many
opened up, and many more departments are there, many more course structures have come up. So that was our structure in those days. So I opted for sound. There were about 10 students from each category, out of which 2 were foreigners. One was a reserved category.
Okay.
So effectively 7 students per batch for guys like us. And yeah, we are lucky to get through. And that's where the journey began, and my professional journey began in sound. In 87, I came to Bombay. I worked on location initially, on location sound. I worked as a assistant sound recordist. I worked as a sound recordist for a documentary made by Ketan Mehta called Bandhani. And this was shot in Kutch, in Bhujia, in Kutch.
This was after you passed from
after I came out, 87.
So how did that meeting happen with Ketan Mehta and?
This happened because, fortunately for us, our alumni were seniors who were in Bombay at that time. They would prefer, like somebody would say that, so and so is looking for a sound recordist for this thing. So one of my seniors, Akhilesh, actually told me that I'm busy with a feature film project and this is this documentary, would you be interested? And I kind of jumped at the idea. The first job being an independent job in this thing. It had its moments of awkwardness, but then it gave me a very nice experience of being in the professional field. What the institute, or any kind of institution, not just FTI, today there are many more institutes. What they do is they give you the theory, they give you the reason why you're doing it. But the professionalism comes from the industry. And so it kind of started getting me into the recording process and understanding the whole location sound thing, which we had done in FTI. So it was not like you're doing something, you're seeing things for the first time. We were very well equipped at that time. The industry was equipped with the institute was equipped with some of the best mixing consoles and recorders, and it was a very privileged place. So at a subsidized rate, it still is very subsidized compared to the other places. So we got really some very good stuff, and that kind of equipped us. So when we landed in Bombay and we started working with the equipment that we got, obviously a familiarization and a certain understanding of the training that you have gone through helped us in executing that. So if you may, then we actually learned driving over there. Then we started concentrating on the journey once you came to this profession. So that's how my journey began. My second project was, I was an assistant to an American sound recordist called Juan Rodriguez for a film called Salaam Bombay. So I worked in that, and that was an eye opener of sorts, and that kind of really, and that sustained me for a while, because being a foreign unit, they kind of paid well.
Okay.
So I went home, and then we could have a decent meal. And though I mean, my parents were like, I was not under this whole pressure of sending money back home. I made it a point to survive on without
Whatever you-
taking whatever you this thing, because enough. Dad had done enough, and it's like you wanted to give him a break. So you started working, and when slowly money happened, it was a great feeling. And so that kind of started off my whole thing. But eventually, I wanted to get into music recording, which was I found far more interesting and far more creative than
Location.
than location recording. I would not say it's not. It's very elaborate and very creative today, even in those days. But my main thing was, in those days, sync sound was uh, not norm in Bombay, in Bollywood. So people would dub, and then you land up on location, do all the sounds, record all the stuff, and then finally they're not going to be used, and they don't have the right kind of cameras, they didn't have the right kind of this thing. So I didn't want to do something which was, eventually you would land up dubbing all the actors and this thing. For me, dubbing is a very dubbing dialogues is one of the most boring things in film. So I couldn't see myself doing that, all my life.
But
And
usually when you were doing location sound in those films, did you only have to go to the studio and dub them, or does somebody else take over, and how does this work?
no, the whole thing was even today, even if it's not a like the sound recordist, usually by default becomes the sound designer of the film. That had been the norm. There was no sound designer per se. There was a mix engineer, but the whole process of track laying, the whole process of laying tracks for a film was being done by the editor. So all the effects tracks, all those things would be laid by the sound recordist would grab the sounds, would transfer them onto tape, and then give it to the editor. The editor would cut them and lay the tracks on the Steenbeck. It was a very elaborate process. So it was a combination. It had always been, still is a combination of a sound recordist and editor.
But it was very time consuming that time. And
Time consuming. Also, the work structure, the work balance was different because of and thanks to today's technology, the whole thing has changed. The whole process has changed. I'll tell you how. Like suppose if I was recording on location, if it was sync sound, it was sync sound. There was no, there were tracks from the thing. And if it was not sync sound, then you would dub the actors. Then they would go to the locations, collect the sound effects. You would record incidental sound effects like car coming, stopping. You have to recreate the entire sound.
there's no bank that, I mean, that
There was
point.
no. I mean, the banks, whatever banks were, there were banks that you created, or whoever had more experience and had this thing. There were these places called transfer rooms where from a Nagra quarter-inch recorder, they would transfer it onto a 35 tape. Either they used to have those striped tapes. They were either full coat tapes or they were striped tapes. So they would record them on that, and then they would send it to the editor. They would send all these soundtracks to the editor. Now the editor had his assistants, who we know today as sound editors, who would sit and hear those tracks and match them with the film and lay them on the film, because the sound recordist was not expected to do that. He was expected to record and give it to the editor and supervise the mix later on when the film went into mixing. So the sound designer's part was mostly played by the mix engineer or the re-recording engineer. So so when the tracks would go over there, and the tracks would go, most editors didn't have a proper concept of, there were very few editors actually who gave you very good tracks. But most of them, they had no idea, and especially these assistants, they would roll and sometimes they would lay tracks backwards, and so there was a lot of process in the whole. There was no thinking, many times there was no thinking, there was just a loop of cricket sounds, there was a loop of bird sounds, so it was as simplistic as that. So and that largely depended on directors, what kind of effect he wanted here, what kind of this thing. And the mix engineer who sat there and who actually sat and while doing the mix would sit and do the designing of the thing. So the mix engineer got a the re-recording engineer for films got an added status. He had this other thing of being. Sadly, that's not the case anymore, because now the sound designer has more or less taken on that role. And because of the change in technology, what has happened is the entire track laying exercise has shifted straight to the sound department, thanks to our computers. And we have innumerable number of tracks that we can work on. And we have the blessed undo button. If something goes wrong, you can always undo that. We didn't have that privilege in those days, because if it was a wrong cut, it was a wrong cut, boss. So our generation saw, I consider my generation very lucky, because we saw the exiting of the valve, the vacuum tube technology. In fact, we just saw the last few traces of it, but then we saw those machines, we even worked on some. The most part of it was magnetic, and all this on the analog domain, of course. And most part of our career was magnetic. So magnetic tapes and magnetic mediums, like all formats of magnetic tape, all in those days, like solid state components for your this thing, no vacuum tubes, no this thing. We are trying to get them back today, like vacuum tube mics and vacuum tube compressors, to get a particular tone, but in those days that was it. So we saw largely, and we saw the introduction of digital technology. So what we did was we saw, and we were very lucky, very privileged, that I could see the entry of the computer, the ADATs, the tape-based digital machines, the hi-8s, and slowly trying to understand that. And the funny part was, it was new the world over. While in the West, the graph was very linear. Like they went from one format to another format to another format, and it was very linear till they came to digital. For us, we started off on a very basic analog setup, and suddenly we went to digital. So suddenly we were at par with the West even today because of the technology. So the way I lay the tracks over here, I've met a few people abroad, and they have come and seen my tracks, and suddenly we realized that the way we work is not very different. The only thing is, he gets 9 months to do his sound post-production, I get 20 days. So, and still you
managed to come up with...
Oh yes.
that pressure you...
Yes, we try, because we try and make 48 hours a day. So...
That's very commendable.
Yes, and all my fellow engineers and sound designers are also working under similar pressure. And now the added pressure is, because there are so many of us, the monies also have leveled out. Okay. So it's not that we made money, but then it's just that made so much money as the actors or the producers or any other this thing, but it's just that now it's got spread. See, most of my professional career has gone into song and music recording. I've had the privilege of working with some of the best composers, some of the best directors and producers in this industry for the last 25 years. It has been a nice, comfortable journey. I wish I had more bank balance. I wish I had a bank balance, forget more. But I have no regrets. I love this work of mine. And having largely worked in the song and music industry, there was one point where I said, okay, now I have done a lot of songs. I've mixed a lot of songs. I've worked a lot of songs, worked on a lot of songs. And it has been a great this thing. Now I wanted to go a step further. And I said that I want to design the entire soundtrack of the film. I want to do the sound design. For me, sound design is not just effects tracking. For me, sound design is the tone of the dialogues, the way they're going to deliver the dialogues, the tonal quality of the voice. And then from there, when it breaks into a song, I want these things to blend. The musical quality, the way you treat the music, the way the film score, the way you treat the film score, the way you treat the songs, the way you treat the dialogues, the way you treat the effects, and I want to merge them. They should not stand out as departments.
Correct, because I remember in some films when we see a song coming in, audio-wise, you suddenly feel there is a change in the tone.
Yeah.
There's a change in the levels, the volume, whatever. As a common man that sees or watches a movie,
yes,
you feel that difference. So, as a sound designer, this is your job.
As a sound designer, what I have tried to do is I have tried to of course, a lot depends on the director and on the kind of film. So even if it's breaking into a song and dance ritual, uh, I would want that transition to be smooth. One example of this is in Parinita, for example, where Saif speaks a dialogue. There's a song called Piyu Bole Piya Bole. Saif speaks, and then slowly they get into a song. Vidya speaks, and then slowly they break into a song. So in this whole process, Vinod and Pradeep asked Sonu to. Sonu is a very good mimic. Sonu Nigam. So they asked Sonu to mimic Saif. And he did it. He did it. He understood the thing. He sat down for some time. We sat in the studio till he got mentally prepared. And then he came to sing the song. So the intense moment, the intense romance, the intensity of the whole thing, his dialogue, and between the dialogue, the song, and again from song to dialogue. So these transitions were very, very much there. So I could not have like a dialogue treated in one way and the singer's voice treated in another way. For me, that is a big challenge, and for me, that merging should happen. It helped with that kind of a script, and also Pradeep Sarkar, the director, kind of gave me that space to do that work. And I really have respect for all these people who make it possible. So what happens is the kind of EQs, the kind of tone setting that you would want. For me, when I'm mixing a film, the dialogue I treat as the voice in a song. All the other elements, all the other arrangements are the effects and the background score and the incidental effects, the Foleys. They all work around the dialogue. So my music recording background has really contributed in my whole design. And I've seen people who have an understanding, an intense understanding of music, do a much better job. Not only in sound, but even on the film by and large. If you see some of the directors who are very successful, you'll see that their association with music is very close. Either they themselves are musicians or they have been very closely associated with music, but music has been an extensive part of their life. Some of them are Sanjay Bansali, Pradeep Sarkar, Vidhu Vinod Chopra. So all these guys, they are very intense with music, very intensely associated with music. That today's technology, we are able to create more stuff. It's become much more flexible. You are very closely associated with VSTs and things like that, which we are, like sadly what has happened is now a lot of musicians have lost their jobs. But that is inevitable, boss. And what has happened, like, suppose that you had like 5 or 6 guitarists sitting and playing the guitar, just a rhythm guitar, like, if you're going to do a CFG routine or a D, E kind of a whatever, वही बजाना है उसको बैठ के. I don't need them anymore. I've got these wonderful VSTs with wonderful guitar tones which are just going to give me that rhythm guitar.
Today even an iPad does that.
An iPad does that. It is inevitable, boss. With the technology, with the...
It's even growing smaller.
It's growing smaller. And the violin section, a smartly arranged violin section, sounds good with a VST. We just add the live section to give it that slight dirt or the slight irregularity, that slight human irregularity that you would require. And humanness to the whole process. But sadly, there are no new faces in the violin section today. The Indian percussion section, which used to be really strong, has now almost kind of disintegrated as a group. So we won't get these people anymore, unfortunately. Unlike in the West, where they have the classical section, they have a horn section, they have the string section, they have these orchestras, they have these philharmonic orchestras. So tomorrow, if you want to record a whole section in Hollywood, you can get all these guys to come and do the work over there. Sadly, what we are doing now is Bombay is folding up all these faculties. the violinists have not put in their sons into this, into being another violinist.
Maybe they're becoming programmers, or
They're becoming programmers, or they're getting into some other industry altogether.
Not in music.
And not in music. You know, unfortunately, if there was a lot more, you know, a good share of budgeting went into this, a good, you know, if they were paid very well, then probably we would have sustained with, you know, better musicians coming in. So what is effectively happening now is we are going to Chennai, but tomorrow Chennai is also going to be folding up.
And it's happening also there.
It's happening there also. It's inevitable. So what happens is the bigger productions who can afford it are going to Europe. They're going to Czechoslovakia, they're going to London, they're going to Hungary to record the string sections over there. So maybe if you look at it that way, it's getting global, but then how many people can afford that? And it's sad that this whole section is dying out.
Similarly, there was a mention, or some people are feeling that the days of the mix engineer are also kind of, you know, fading out. Do you think that is happening also? I mean, just mix engineer. I'm not talking about a...
See, the mix engineer for a song.
For song.
For songs, there is a possibility. Because what is happening now is the person who is doing the programming, he has a better understanding of sound as well. So he is also trained in sound in many cases. He's done a course in recording.
Right.
So what is happening, and I would like to coin the term as merging. The programmer and the engineer are slowly merging as one entity now. And the role of the engineer will always be there, because as a programmer, if I'm sitting and working on the aesthetics of the song, I would want somebody to be with me and take the sonic quality part of it. So the sound engineers, the mix engineers' responsibility is grown much more, because he has to be now much more involved in the music making process.
Unlike when just tracks or tapes used to be there, and
you just had to give a
mechanical.
So today you still need the mix engineer. But like the economics have changed. Earlier what used to happen was we used to take about, say, 7 days to record one film song. And all that was done in the studio. So we would ideate. The composer would come, he would compose, but then the whole ideation process, say, the final mix was entirely done in the recording studio, where the director would say that, okay, I need this or I need that. So it was a process which kind of started over there and ended over there. So the songs were then programmed on location, the live musicians came in, the singers came in, the vocalists came in, the soloists came in. So all these people came and added value to the whole thing. Our generation came in after the whole 100-piece section era. So we did not see much of that thing where, you know, all the musicians had to play together on one track. Fortunately, we came in when, you know, multi-tracking had just started with 3 or 4 tracks, and you could have lesser number of musicians and compartmentalize the whole process. And we took to that, you know. As a newer generation, for us it was not very difficult to absorb that. An older generation found it very difficult to work with headphones, and the whole process of multi-tracking for him, you know, kind of beat him. So the arranger slightly got a little more smart now, because he had to work backwards. When you're recording, you're working backwards. You've started with your drum programming, your bass guitars, and, you know, you keep going back till finally you come to the voice. Earlier it was easy to have the singer sit there and the musicians do that, and the guy is sitting and writing down the parts that, okay, now this is what you're going to sing. After 4 bars, he's going to play this, and therefore... So now the entire process, the arranger has to think of right from this thing. And our job was with the arranger, because there was a limitation of tracks. I would sit with the arranger and see, okay, how many musicians do we require for this? How many bars is he going to play? Because after that I have to punch him out, because there is some other soloist who has played. I cannot afford to do this thing. So I would sit and exchange notes with the arranger and write down the parts. That, okay, after these many bars will be this solo, or after these many bars will be this. So I'd sit with him and I would do my bit of work so that I was on the same page with him, literally. So this process in our days were also there. You know, the arranger, the programmer. Today is the programmer and the engineer. In those days it was the engineer and the arranger. So it's how you got yourself involved in the whole process. I believed that you had to get involved musically. I had to understand what he was trying to get at. Otherwise, I will not be able to give him that tone. I should think 3 steps, 4 steps ahead of what he is thinking. So before he even looked at me, I would have done the job. So that is the, you know that this is going to be a problem later on. So you make sure that he's sailing. For me, it was very comfortable. It was very important to see that the performer, the soloist or the singer, is comfortable. So once he's comfortable, he'll be able to perform. For me, those things are very important in a recording. You know, if this guy is not getting his proper monitoring on the headphones, he will not sing in key, for God's sake. Don't blame him for going off key. You're not giving him a right mix in his monitor. So he has to sit, he has to understand. So what I do is, even today, when I'm recording somebody in the studio, in whichever studio, I make sure that the headphone foldback this person is getting is right. So if you're getting the right harmonies in a properly balanced way, and your voice, this thing, plus minus, jaise aap kar lo, like, okay, you want it a little louder or you want it a little softer, but essentially you should hear the mix like you're hearing the mix here. Then you will feel more comfortable, whether you're a solo flautist or a guitarist or a singer. You need your headphone balance. So these are some of the things which are still there. How you're going to place the mic is still there. You cannot, I have come across all these VSTs who say that, okay, this is so and so kind of microphone, or this is that kind of a sound. I know it's bullshit. Sorry, but I know it's bullshit. That's because I've heard that sound. So you cannot, you have to really, I'm not saying you cannot arrive at that sound. Of course you will over a period of time. Till now I have not come across that. So you do require this microphone. You do require this microphone with a, great frequency response. Yeah. You do need to understand where you're going to keep that. The acoustics, these things are very important, even today. So what happens is, like, if it is there, I know if there's a processing happening, I can take it flat and I can do the EQ whatever way and this thing. But for me, it is important, and unless you do it, you will not realize that if you've not placed the microphone in the right place, you're not going to get that kind of a sound. If there's a guitar with a box and a hole over there, there is a reason for that. So if you put your mic here, it's going to sound different. If you put your mic near the neck, it is going to sound different. If you put your mic
at the bottom,
at the bridge, it's going to sound different. At the bottom, it's going to sound different. So what is the combination that you're looking at? What is the kind of sound that you're looking at from that? Acoustically, if you can arrive at that, it's brilliant. I mean, the same instrument can sound very different in very many ways.